Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name's John Dickens. I'm editor of Schools Week. I hope you're all as excited as I am to join our webinar today on the curriculum and assessment review under the car bonnet. I just need to say thank you to all those people who have been in touch about the webinar title. One person said it led to them getting funny looks on the tube after they burst out laughing when they read it. Another reader called it a filthy title, which I think is positive feedback. But I do have to fess up, I can't take credit for coming up with the pun. So thank you to our FE Week editor, Shane Chowan, for that. We've had nearly 1,000 people register to join us live this morning, and I'm certain that many more will watch the recording, which will be available on the Schools Week website later today. We're really privileged to have Professor Becky Francis, the review chair, join us today. I'd just like to say a huge thanks to Becky for finding the time to do this. We hope today to get under the headlines of her review recommendations, to understand more about her thinking, but also to look at the reaction, the government's response, and how this will all land in classrooms up and down the country. Many of her recommendations have been taken up by government, meaning her review is now the blueprint for the education policy agenda over the next 5 years. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in Becky, who has a presentation on her review findings. We'll then launch straight into a Q&A based on the many questions that we've had from our listeners. So Becky, over to you.
Hello there, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, John, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk to everyone today. I hope that many of you will have had a chance to have a look at the Curriculum and Assessment Review report, to have at least flicked through it or maybe read the executive summary if you haven't had a chance to read almost 200 pages yet. I'm going to just skip through the introduction to the report and some of the headline sort of findings and recommendations there. And then, of course, as John said, we're going to have the opportunity to turn to questions. So if I can have the next slide, please. Many of you will be familiar by now with the background to the review. So again, I won't spend long on this, but just to remind everybody, this has been a very ambitious project. And we had just over a year to assess curriculum and assessment in England through from Key Stage 1 all the way into post-16. We have delivered to time. We produced our interim report back in March, which many of you will be familiar with. And then on Wednesday, we produced the final report, and the government published its response shortly after that, that of course sets out the plans for implementation. If I can have the next slide, please. You're familiar as well by now with the review expert panel, and I must say it has been such a privilege and a pleasure to work with these individuals and as a collective, because they've been incredibly collegiate and collaborative along the way. As you'll see, they represent not just the different sectors of education, but that deep professional expertise, which has really underpinned the whole of the review. Next slide, please. You'll also probably be familiar with the determination of the review to be strongly evidence-led. I'm really delighted with how this has distinguished the review, really, in terms of both the volume and the variety of data and evidence that we've collected. We've drawn, of course, on those national data sets, the MPD and LEO data sets, as well as the huge data resources here at the Department for Education. We've polled young people, parents and others, and it's been supported by other polling organisations as well. Most gratifying of all has been the over 7,000 responses to our call for evidence. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you to the very many of you, I'm sure, on this call who have submitted to the call for evidence. Really, to have that depth of understanding of people's experiences on the ground, whether that's professionals and leaders, or of course, other stakeholders, young people and their parents, employers, and so on. It's been absolutely invaluable. And again, the professional expertise reflected in the response to the call for evidence has been amazing. So many, many thanks again to those of you who participated. Next slide, please. And I think you're familiar too with the principles underpinning the review. Obviously, as I've said, evidence and data informed, but also our mantra of evolution, not revolution. And as we explained in the interim report, this is for two key reasons. One is our appraisal that actually much is going well in the system at present, and we should take the time to celebrate and recognise that. You know, in comparison to our international peers and different leading jurisdictions in education, we're doing pretty well against a range of different outcome measures. But there are areas that we need to attend, and of course, I'll come back to that. The other point, of course, is about capacity in the system and capacity for change. So we certainly don't want to mend things that don't need fixing, and we want to be mindful of issues about implementation as we move through the review. To that end, of course, we've also been aware of trade-offs, and we've tried to focus on key issues and give those most of our attention, including removing barriers true to that social justice lens, and I'll come back to that as well. If I could have the next slide, please. So coming to some of those key findings and recommendations. Next slide. As we set out in the interim report, because we think much in this system is well evidenced and successful, again, due to the very hard work over many years of teachers and leaders and the determination of policymakers across a succession of different governments to support high and rising standards in the system. We want to retain a lot of the present architecture and the key milestones that we think are generally working well. Likewise, the knowledge-rich approach. If we can just skip through the next bullet. But, you know, there are, of course, significant areas in need of change as we set out in the interim report. Next slide. The first four bullets here are those that we flagged in the interim report, and then we have worked on our analysis and findings in development of these themes as well as other areas. And the fifth bullet, of course, assessment and accountability, infuses and speaks to those areas as well. And again, I'll just quickly skip through these different areas now. If we can have the next slide. So the first area is the strap line. You know, high standards must mean high standards for all young people. As you all know, we have at the moment these long-standing significant gaps for socioeconomic disadvantage in relation to attainment. And also when we look at progress through the system, the gaps for progress for young people with SEND, irrespective of their condition or whether young people have SEN or whether they have disabilities. So we really have taken, had a determined effort to try to think how we can support remediation of those gaps. In terms of socioeconomic disadvantage, we've gone at this in three main ways. The first way has been a subject by subject approach, looking at areas where there might be gaps and barriers to progress. So to exemplify a couple of our findings there, one is the entitlement for all young people to take triple science that we've recommended. That's because of the very close relationship between taking triple science and then progressing on to A level in a science subject, and indeed to undergraduate study as well. And of course, as we know, those STEM careers are often well remunerated, but there's a very large gap for social disadvantage in regard to who gets to take triple science. Now, just to be super clear, because there's been a little bit of confusion on this point to date, this is not to say all young people, of course, need to take triple science. It's about an entitlement to take triple science. Another example is our encouragement of the government to think how to support more young people to be able to learn a musical instrument and read music, because we know this is important for young people thriving at GCSE in music. And if a subject is in the national curriculum, all young people must be able to access it. So hopefully that gives you some examples from the subject by subject approach. The second way that we've tried to address these issues is by looking at transition from Key Stage 2 to 3, and then progress when young people move through Key Stage 3, where at present that gap widens quite significantly. So to that end, and to try to narrow the funnel of young people that come through at age 16, taking their GCSEs and currently not succeeding in gaining a level 2 at Maths and English at GCSE, we have recommended a diagnostic test in Maths and English as a tool for teachers to be taken in Year 8. And basically, the idea being that this is to help teachers identify where there are weaknesses for young people in Year 8 in Maths and English, around sort of core competencies in English and core concepts in maths, to ensure that there is time to remediate those gaps before they grow further and before young people progress into Key Stage 4 and their GCSE study. You'll notice that that is slightly different to the government's completely separate recommendation about reading tests in Key Stage 3. The third way that we've looked at supporting young people from socially disadvantaged backgrounds and other vulnerable young people is by attending to vocational provision at level 3, post-16, and looking at also English and Maths resits post-16. And I'll come back to those points in a second. If I can have the next slide, please. The next theme was around curriculum shape and subject content. Now here we have designed a range of different curriculum principles, evidence-based, which we have applied to our work through the curriculum, but also that we're recommending the government adopt and apply to now the work going forward to design in and update the programmes of study. They exemplify a range of different principles around good sequencing, good design, good sequential and horizontal coherence, a knowledge-rich approach, and so on. Also empowering teachers and professional expertise in regard to that greater agency, if we can ensure that the national curriculum doesn't exceed its intended boundaries. As you know, the national curriculum was never meant to be the entirety of the school day, but we've heard too often about overload, and Oak Academy's analysis strongly suggests that at present, to teach the full curriculum properly exceeds the entirety of the school day. So we're trying to find ways to pare that back to allow that professional autonomy and for schools and trusts to be able to innovate, bring the national curriculum to life, as well as be able to do all the other amazing things schools do, enrichment activities and so forth that support young people to thrive. The final important principle is, to that end, around being mindful of time in the school day in the development of the programmes of study. You might think that that's simple common sense, but apparently it's an innovation. So hopefully this will all help, as well as our subject by subject attention to where we've heard particularly about overload. And as I've explained before, and those of you who have read the report know, we have individual sections and recommendations on every area and subject area of the national curriculum. In terms of changes, I'll just mention very briefly, the two areas of change are suggestions in RE and suggestions, in fact, a direct recommendation to the government, which the government have accepted in bringing citizenship into the national curriculum in primary education. If I can have the next slide. The next slide helps to explain the rationale for that. There were 5 areas of more applied knowledge and skill that we heard very strongly through the call for evidence and which are well evidenced. We need to give more visibility in the national curriculum. I'll whiz through them quickly, but the point is that some of them have citizenship as their natural subject home. So we wanted to make sure that all young people can access these in the primary curriculum. So first of all, financial education, where I've said many times now, I'm a little bit of a convert. I was a bit skeptical about this at the beginning of the review, but actually both young people's appetite for more financial education, but also the evidence reasons for that have come through really strongly in the work of the review. And both the economic climate and the cost of living crisis and so forth, but also young people's online experiences and so forth, their digital transactions, the misinformation that they see online, all gives life to those reasons that financial literacy is more important than ever. Digital literacy, likewise, for some of the same reasons, as well as obviously the infusion of digital through young people's lives and in their future careers. We think, of course, that computing is the main subject home for this, although we've recommended greater attention in a couple of other subject areas as well. But computing is a strong area of attention in the review, both the computing curriculum and the GCSE. Media literacy, likewise, many of you will rightly point out that it's strong knowledge that that enables young people to disaggregate fact from fiction, and that's the main business of the school curriculum. But those skills of evaluation, that critical lens, the weighing of evidence and the drawing on different sources does need to be drawn out and supported as well. We think that that's done in a range of different subject areas, but of course, including citizenship. The next area of climate science is, of course, knowledge rather than skills. It's been over a decade since the last review, and of course, climate change has accelerated in the meantime, and our knowledge of climate science too. So we think that this needs to be drawn out further in both the science curriculum and geography, and with some greater attention to sustainability in areas like design technology and so on. And then the final area is, of course, just the skill, oracy, the spoken word. Actually, we think that oracy is quite well attended in the existing curriculum and programmes of study, but we've heard very strong evidence that for whatever reason, it's not sufficiently enacted on the ground. So we've taken some steps to strengthen that in the English and drama curricula, for example, but also we're recommending that there be an oracy framework added to the existing non-statutory frameworks in reading and writing to both signify the importance of the area for teachers, but also provide that resource into how that could be best practiced in school. Moving on, please. The fourth area is post-16 education. Now, many of you will be familiar. It was incredibly gratifying, actually, that the government have accepted so many of our recommendations and analysis in this space, as you saw when the skills white paper landed a couple of weeks ago. So our attention and the very clear evidence that we could see early on in the review that applied and more vocationally facing qualifications would need to be retained in the level 3 space, and that A level and T level were not going to be sufficient to accommodate the needs of the very large volume of young people in this area at level 3. That came through very clearly early on. So we have looked at the landscape. We think it's very evident that the hundreds of different qualifications, different brands, different names, shapes, sizes, the different grading schemes and so forth that all exist across the applied general space are too incoherent, too confusing for young people, parents, and of course employers. So we need to corral that greater clarity and coherence across that suite of qualifications, which we recommended be called V levels. We support, the government and the review are aligned on that greater coherence and that move towards clarity. Where we differ slightly is that while we agree that the majority of these new qualifications should be small qualifications to provide flexibility, potentially to mix with A levels and so forth, actually we think that there is a need to retain some larger qualifications in that space, both to achieve holism in some limited areas, and of course to guard against unnecessary repetition of particular, whether it's health and safety or safeguarding and so on. We don't want to end up in a system where young people have to take the same topics 3 times across 3 small qualifications and so on. So we have recommended that the government consult properly and take great care that babies aren't thrown out with bathwater in the design of these new qualifications, and to take care in their implementation as well. We are, though, completely aligned on the introduction of the 2 pathways at level 2. One for learners looking to progress to a level 2 occupation, and others to support learners looking to progress to level 3 and then higher learning. We've talked a little bit about continued improvements to T levels and, of course, where necessary, updates to A levels based on the changes to GCSE subject content that we're recommending. And then in terms of maths and English retakes and the existing situation at post-16, we are supportive of the ongoing need for young people that didn't gain their level 2 at age 16 to continue with maths and English, which is so important both for citizenship and general life, but also for accessing different gateways and pathways. But we do need to address greater nuance in the system, because there's that incredibly depressing statistic that at present almost 2/3 of young people are not making any grade progress at all in their study of maths and English post-16. So we're recommending that for those young people who secured a grade 3, that at GCSE, that they continue to be supported to retake their GCSE and thrive through that. But that for those young people who got a grade 2 or below, although they would retain an entitlement to take the GCSE, and we're recommending the instigation of a stepping stone qualification, which will take them back to basics, enable them to move through their math, building those core concepts in maths and English. Hopefully it takes them to the end of, a high grade 3. So hopefully as many as possible will go on and achieve the GCSE. But for those that don't, at least they will have made progress in their maths and English during the duration. Final issue, of course, if we can change slide, is accountability and assessment. And I expect you've heard enough from me and my voice, so I'll try to just wrap this up very quickly. You'll be aware that we have recommended the removal of the EBAC accountability measures. That's for good reason, and you can see the analysis in the report. Very, very quick summary. You know that compared to the expectation that 90% of schools would be enforcing this by now, only 40% of schools do. So the measure has really struggled. Languages is the same, basically. You know, it's there's 1 percentage point increase in young people taking languages now compared to before the introduction of the EBAC. And it is widening the gap for disadvantaged young people moving into the EBAC, while also squeezing particular subject areas. So we have recommended that EBAC is removed. Of course, schools that wish to continue offering the EBAC can continue to do so. It's only an accountability measure. But we're recommending the retention of the Progress 8 accountability measure as currently stands, because we think that the present measure gives a really good balance between academic breadth for all, which we know is really important to support life chances, but allowing that bit of extra flexibility for young people to be able to take subjects that they're passionate about and engage them and that support their future pathways. I think, again, you're clear that this is different from the government are proposing something slightly different, but again, probably we'll come back to that in questions. We're reducing the GCSE exam volume, time to students spend sitting exams, be reduced by at least 10%. That 10% is based on Ofqual modelling of what can be achieved without detriment to standards or any detriment or any significant detriment to reliability. Obviously, once you go further, the devil becomes in the detail. It depends on different subject areas, and also it will depend on the implementation of some of our other recommendations. So we've asked, the experts, Ofqual and the DFE, to see whether there's the potential to go further, but without any detriment to standards, because of course trust in the system and that rigour for young people is really important. Key Stage 2, where we were disturbed to hear about some concerns about writing in primary compared to the broader success that we've seen in recent years around reading. So we've taken the recommendation here to have greater attention to writing, and to that end, while of course keeping the core elements in grammar, punctuation and spelling, focus greater attention on GPS in practice rather than, memorization about complicated technical issues like fronted adverbials and so on. I've talked about the diagnostic checks already. Accessibility has run as a strand through the review. You'll see that through that attention throughout. And we have recommended that the DFE undertake a stream of work led by Oak National Academy and other providers to support teachers regarding adaptation of the curriculum where necessary, and to exemplify how the curriculum can be as open and accessible in an inclusive classroom as possible. I think that probably takes me to the end of my whistle-stop tour. Thanks so much for listening. And again, hopefully this is empowering to the profession. And I hope I've convinced you that we have heard you and taken an evidence-led approach throughout. I really look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Becky. That was super insightful and lots for us to pick up on. And I'm just going to launch straight into the questions if that's all right. I just want to start on a bit of a personal level. Like, how has this week been for you? Like, you obviously Tuesday night is when the sort of report was finalized, sent to journalists, and before all the newspapers landed on Wednesday morning. How are you feeling?
Um, a great question. You can hear that it's already affecting my voice, John. So I've been doing a lot of communicating. And from that point of view, I guess I haven't quite had time for the dust to settle yet, because I'm still very much in communication mode, and trying to get as many messages out there before I actually leave the DFE and return to my day job leading the
Yeah.
Education Endowment Foundation, which I do at the end of today. So I think this weekend will be where I get a tiny bit of time to digest and think about what's landed. But I do feel, as I said earlier, incredibly gratified that where we have a couple of points of minor difference, actually the government has been very supportive of the review and our findings, both in terms of pre-16 and post-16. So I really hope that we will have a long-lasting legacy.
Yeah, we'll get into those. We'll get into those issues a little bit later. Just going back to the reaction. How do you think it's landed with the sector? There was obviously, just thinking outside the sector, there was a super critical Daily Mail front page that claimed the review was sort of dumbing down schools, and there were lots of sector leaders who sort of came out and rebutted that and said it was nonsense. But what do you make of those claims?
Well, in terms of the dumbing down standards, I suppose that it's frustrating when media stories and headlines have been written in advance of the review, or certainly without reading the report. As I've said already, standards have been at the absolute heart of everything we've done. And of course, meaningfully, standards needing to mean high standards for all young people has been the beating heart of the review. I think that anybody that reads the report will see the various ways that we've gone at this and the need to raise standards in a myriad range of different ways, from issues around, supporting better writing, supporting momentum key stage 3, access to, as we've said, triple science, music, and so on. I don't think any of these findings can be criticised as reducing standards. And indeed, if called to, I could argue that some of the sort of long-standing problems have needed much more urgent attention than they've received to date. But nevertheless, I wouldn't want to undermine the fact that I think that overall standards have improved in the last quarter century, and we really need to maintain that work. In regard to, the response from the sector, I just feel so, again, sort of proud and privileged, really. I've felt that the sector has engaged so much with the review, and perhaps because of that, I've felt that the sector has my back. They have understood the evidence-led approach. They've put their faith in that. And of course, again, I think the sector have been convinced by the experts on the panel and their deep expertise as well as commitment to the sector. And I'm really gratified to see that reflected in the response to the report. Of course, everybody will find something, I'm sure, in the report that they disagree with or that doesn't speak to their particular passion. But I really hope that overall, professionals will see this as a sensible review, giving coherent direction to the sector and allowing that professional leadership to come through strongly.
Well, I mean, we've had lots of questions about the EBAC. There seems to be some concerns about the potential impact on the take-up of languages. So it seems like from the national data that the introducing the EBAC seemed to sort of stem a drop in take-up in languages. And while it originally sort of led to a small boost, take-up has stagnated for a while. But there are concerns that that will now drop again. Do you agree with those concerns?
I think the concerns are fair. It's really difficult to attribute causality with the EBAC, whether that's to, issues with modern foreign language or to issues with the drop away in the arts, which is often claimed to be an effect of the e-back. I think on both sides, there is sort of plausible hypotheses here. Actually, as I've said already, we don't see, the e-back certainly hasn't generated an uptake in modern foreign language, but it's plausible to argue that it may have sort of caught or ceased what could have been otherwise further falling away. But we can't, particularly because the e-back is so limited in its application, only, as I said, only around 40% of schools operating it. We can't rely on the e-back or some accountability measure to be supporting a subject area. This is about professional autonomy, responsibility, and of course also students' appetite. So we think that support for modern language had to happen in other ways. And those who are modern foreign language teachers on the call, I hope will support the recommendations we've made in regard to modern foreign languages, in regard to strengthening teaching in primary, and the support for better practice across transition as well. We did hear a lot of calls for modern foreign language to be removed in primary, a lot of concern that it's not being done well. So actually, we could have better use of curriculum time. We didn't go in that direction, of course. We want to support modern foreign languages to thrive. But I guess it's also perhaps informative to say that having reviewed the international literature here, it's interesting to see that this seems to be an issue for every English-speaking nation.
Yeah. One following on from the e-back, obviously you made a recommendation in relation to Progress 8, and I think the review was quite clear that you said the Progress 8 bucket should stay as they are. I think you said that they had good breadth already. The government's announcement in relation to that recommendation is quite a bit different from yours. The government has said that they are going to consult on proposals to reform Progress 8 and change, I think, 6 of the 8 buckets. What do you think about those plans?
Well, there were clear reasons why we adopted the proposal that we've made, and we really kicked the tires hard on this. Our view is that no single performance measure can be perfect, and there is a risk of engineering if every time you lever something in one way, it has consequences in others. So that was why we thought that it's simplest to leave the back. Now I'm confusing myself. Leave Progress 8 as stands, with the e-back bucket intact within Progress 8. You'll have heard we're recommending that be renamed as the academic breadth bucket, to basically ensure that all young people have an entitlement to that academic breadth across academic subjects, which we know is important to guard, but giving just a little bit more free choice to young people to, as I said earlier, pursue their passions. We think that's a good balance. Obviously, you can go at this in different ways. There's different strengths and weaknesses, but we kicked the tires hard, as I said, and we thought that's the best option. Obviously, everybody, as I said, will have their chance to respond to the government in the round through the consultation.
You mentioned there that this risk of engineering. Do you think there is a risk of that with the government's proposals? Because it is quite a big change in relation to the messing around with the buckets.
I think it's better that I probably don't comment on that now. I see
Fair
your
enough.
journalistic instincts.
Okay, that's more than fair. Let's move on. So another really interesting recommendation was to move to put RE in the national curriculum. I think your recommendation was to invite the sector to form a task and finish group and to really sort of push that onus on the sector to own it and come up with a plan. And the government's response also said that they will do it if the sector agrees. Now, having covered the sector for quite a while, people tend to agree on or disagree on curriculum stuff. Do you think that's possible with RE, that in an area that's so divided that the sector can come to a consensus on it?
I think if anybody can lead this, it's Dr. Vanessa Ogden. She's been inspirational, actually, in her leadership of this area during the period of the review, and she commands great respect and trust in that RE sector. So if anybody can, lead this consensus, she can. If not, we know that the problems really are profound. We know it is a very controversial area, as you've said, John, and a very complicated one as well, with the different statutory elements and so forth. So although we have a clear view, as you've rightly summarised, that RE should come into the national curriculum, and it should, in doing so, stop at age 16, as with other subjects. We know that just pursuing that agenda, if there isn't consensus in the sector, would be an incredible sort of bogging down of government time and energy and so forth. So that's why we recommend the sort of two-step approach that you summarised so nicely.
And we'll have the government's agreed to implement a new curriculum, a new national curriculum in 2028. The government said they'll publish a draft curriculum in spring 2026, a final version in 2027 for the rollout in 2028. Are you on board with that timeline? Do you think it's about right?
So I think implementation is very much for the government. We have tried to put some sort of guardrails, hopefully helpful to the DfE, in a range of different ways, both in some of our recommendations, for example, in the triple science recommendation, recommending that time and support is given for the sector to be able to move in that direction and prepare first where necessary. And also in our curriculum principles, which we developed, as I said, to apply to the reviews work, but also that we're recommending be applied to the development of the programme of study undertaken by the DfE going forward. In terms of the timelines of what they can achieve and so forth, obviously I leave that to the expert officials. I think it's plausible. We did, of course, discuss early doors the question of whether there should be a sort of rolling programme of different subject areas or different key stage rollouts and so forth to mitigate, capacity, or whether this should be done holistically. I understand the decision has been made to do this holistically. And I am convinced that that has been done on a careful kind of weighing of the benefits of a holistic, coherent approach between different subject areas, and the government's appraisal that our recommendations, in keeping with evolution, not revolution, are probably more kind of manageable for the sector than might have otherwise been the case. So I know that there has been careful consideration on the DfE's behalf about that.
Yeah. And then just the sort of last question from me before we get more explicitly into readers' questions. There are some areas where you've recommended streamlining content, and that's something that the government's taken on. Can you just explain a little bit more? I think science is a big area, but can you explain a tiny bit more about the thinking behind that?
Yes, so we've taken a subject by subject approach here. We've heard overwhelmingly this experience from the sector that the curriculum is sort of overloaded, or experienced like that by teachers across many different subject areas or phases. And as I've said, Oak National Academy's analysis does suggest that that experience is very well founded. But equally, as I've set out before, actually in some subject areas, when you look at the programme of study, which is incredibly thin and underspecified compared to the experience of professionals working at the chalk face, it's a puzzle as to think, well, how can this be being experienced as so overwhelmed? Some of that might come through from the GCSE stipulations. Others of it, we think, is because of underspecification in the existing curriculum, sometimes leads to teachers feeling that they have to cover everything in the programme of study or everything on a particular subject list, because they're not sure which they should prioritize. So we want to take a subject by subject approach, and that's what you will see in the reports. So some subject areas, as you're saying, there's attention within either the subject as a whole or within the GCSE. And really, then we've got these curriculum principles across the board about attending time in the school day.
Yeah. So we've had loads of questions from readers, and some of them were sort of the basis of my questions, but I'm going to sort of explicitly go through a few now. I'll also give a shout out to the people as well. I hope that's okay, but there's been some really good ones. So the first question is from Andrew Skelding from Endon High School. He says there are always compromises with any change. So what will be the most significant loss when we transition to the new curriculum?
Oh, goodness, the most significant loss. What a good question, Andrew.
Good one,
I
right?
mean,
Yeah.
Andrew's absolutely right to spot, my main takeaway from the review really is the trade-offs. And I've said before that a rather frustrating element of the review is that sometimes it's easy to diagnose a problem, but when you look at the different solutions, often the solutions would make that problem worse rather than better. And so you can understand why the status quo has been the status quo. So definitely I have a big takeaway about trade-offs, and we've tried to be very careful and even-handed in navigating those spaces. In terms of a sort of the biggest loss, I guess, there are risks. Just as we've actually just been discussing. I mean, even when we were just discussing about the e-back, we were talking about some of the risks there.
Yeah.
We've also separately tried to guard against, we've looked at technical awards. Obviously, some of those on the call who are approaching my age will remember about the Wolf Review and some of the awful situation that was happening about equivalent qualifications and a push towards certain young people towards a kind of vocational space.
Yeah.
Lacking academic rigor and so forth. We've put recommendations in place to guard against those tendencies. But as Andrew's rightly indicating, I guess there are risks every time you move levers. So hopefully we've put the right guardrails in place. Fingers crossed.
We've got, I mean, every one of these questions is great, but another one from Samantha Marshall from Athene Communications. She asked, what change do you feel will have the biggest impact?
What change will have the biggest impact? I think that, again, depends on which young people we're talking about. I'd really like to think that our changes to maths and English post-16 will help the very many. I've been deluged with distressing letters, particularly from parents of young people sort of stuck in the reset sausage machine post-16, and the effects on the young people's confidence and so forth. I really hope that our greater nuance in that area will support those young people to thrive as the policy to continue maths and English intends, rather than to have a detrimental impact. Others, of course, you could take as in a much more holistic way. And I've often said, John, that it's very hard to take individual of our recommendations without looking at them in the round. What I hope we achieve in the round is the increasing progress on high standards for all young people, a narrowing of gaps supported here, but also that little bit more flexibility in the system to enable young people to study and enjoy the things that they are passionate about, and that also to be extended to teachers in bringing the curriculum to life.
Great. And this question from Kitty Marlborough, who's deputy head at Imberhorn School. If we are mandating widening participation in triple science, how are we dealing with the skills gap of physics specialist teachers?
Absolutely. And that comes back, Kitty, to the points that I was making about implementation. Obviously, as everyone on the call knows, even in combined science, you're teaching individual sciences, so that subject-based expertise is super important, and teacher supply to that end, particularly the long-standing issue around supply of physics teachers, is important across the board. But no doubt that is exacerbated, by an expectation that schools that haven't presently been offering triple science, that relatively small proportion, of course, but nevertheless, that is implications for them. So that's why we have recommended that this be done over time, and that the government continue their work on teacher supply to enable support for this.
Great. This is from Caroline Thomas at Thorndon School. Given that most schools do not fulfill the Key Stage 3 National Curriculum Programme of Study for Citizenship already, how hopeful are you that Key Stage 2 will be able to work this into an already crammed curriculum?
Yes, a really good question. And I guess that the already crammed curriculum, Caroline, again, some of this resides in the hopefully successful implementation of other of our recommendations that make it less crammed. Obviously, you're right to identify we're expecting citizenship to do quite a lot of heavy lifting. Hence the move of mandatory citizenship in primary. But we know that there have been existing issues with citizenship. We hope that this can be supported, including through resource from the likes of Oak National Academy and others, to support good practice in citizenship, including in some of these perhaps more specialist areas like financial literacy and so forth. But definitely, I think that we're cognizant of that point. Yeah.
Thank you to Tom Ulliott from Bridlington School for this one. What will be removed if schools are expected to deliver triple science, a new computing qualification, and a new languages course? And I think probably just to point out on those latter two, I think they're government recommendations. They're not, that they weren't in the curriculum review.
Yes, thank you for that, John. This is where, it is, I think it's really important probably to take a moment to pause and say, I am so grateful, as I said, that the government has accepted so many of our recommendations. And when you look at the report in the round, you'll see the number of our recommendations, many of those quite in the weeds and subject by subject, all of which the government has accepted and will be moving forward. So as a review team, we are very lucky in that regard in comparison to other reviews in the past. On the other hand, there are these areas of difference. And I think because the government response has come on the same day as the review, it's very easy to confuse, what has been said by the review and what has been said by the government. And the likes of Schools Week and others in the sector disaggregating these, again, I'm really grateful to the work that's going on there. So as John was saying, two of the examples used here, I think certainly the languages suggestion is about, I think the government suggesting the potential for some kind of stepped qualification in languages again, to be fair on them, this is about guarding against some of those risks we were talking about earlier and the need to support modern foreign languages. But that is separate to any recommendation in our review. And the other one, I'm not even sure what is. I have seen these references to something about, is it qualification in AI? I know that the government are interested in proposals that have been made for an A level focusing on data science and AI, which isn't in the purview of our review, but nevertheless seems a plausible and compelling proposition to me. But I have heard, people have said to me, what about this AI GCSE? I don't think that that's an idea anywhere, actually. I don't think that that's in the government response. But again, I think that these are where some of these confusing reports are then leading to mixed messages in the sector. So I think I can put that to bed, and I can certainly say it's not part of the review. We are simply recommending changes to the existing computer science GCSE and the computing curriculum.
I do think that that's right on the computing qualification. I think it is a 16 to 19 one, but I will check after this, and if it's any different, I'll let everybody know. Okay, so this question is from Roisin Phillip, who's from Teach First. She asks, there appears to be no explicit reference to how the revised curriculum aligns with the early years, the EYFS statutory framework. And she just wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, so the early years foundation stage, I mean, this is something that we've been asked about repeatedly during the review. Basically, the early years foundation stage is beyond our terms of reference, and our terms of reference are very clear that we're focused on Key Stage 1 through to post 16. And, I can't comment on those. That's the terms of reference that we've operated to. We have heard actually a lot through the review about the strengths of the early years foundation stage. And I hope that primary teachers and leaders on the call will be gratified at the attention to primary in the review, and the recognition as well that although we talk a lot about subject by subject approach and the importance of the different subjects in the national curriculum, we also do recognise the important holistic contribution made by primary schools and primary teaching to young people's education, their early education, and actually foundational to their development of their love of learning.
We are getting lots of questions in the chat about English and drama. I think one of the recommendations was to bring more of drama into English, and lots of people are asking, will the subject now be called English and drama?
That's a great question, and I must say it's one that we didn't consider in the review. Just to be clear, drama already sits in the English curriculum. This was a move that happened under the last review conducted by Tim Oates and colleagues over a decade ago. There was big protest at the time that drama was then being sort of squeezed into English. And what we have heard a lot is that then drama, while actually many schools continue to teach drama separately, and we've heard a lot about great practice in certain parts of the sector, that's patchy, and in other parts, because of the drama sitting under the English umbrella, sometimes it doesn't get the attention it deserves. We did consider whether we could pull drama back out of English again. And I think if there were sufficient, infinite hours in the school day, there would have been a lot of support for that in the review panel, because many of us are really convinced by the importance of drama in the national curriculum, but also really passionate advocates of drama as well. But there is recognition that actually, given everything that we've heard about sort of curriculum overload and so forth, there just really wasn't the mechanism or room to do that at present. So what we've sought to do is give drama its own section in the English programme of study, which again sort of signifies and steers that greater sort of prioritisation, if you like, and to ensure that that entitlement and attention is available to all young people.
Great. We are very nearly at 11:30, so just two really quick last questions. What was the thing that you left out of the review that you sort of wrestled over the most? I guess like that almost made it but didn't.
Well, I think probably drama would be a good exemplar there. I mean, I'm not saying it's left out. Hopefully people are satisfied that we've given good value to drama and supported it to get that better attention. But it's a good example of something where we discussed at length, whether, the wherewithal to do more, and had to make, coming back to our theme of trade-offs, hopefully the right balance.
Yeah, and finally from me, if I look back at the 2010 curriculum reforms, sorry, the curriculum review, bit before my time at Schools Week, but I'd probably describe it as the knowledge-rich curriculum review. How do you think people will describe your review when they look back in 10 years' time?
Oh, that what a great question. And you're really putting me on the spot there, John. I think that high standards for all would be my mantra. The social justice lens and the determination to do better for those groups of young people currently not well served in our nevertheless improving system have been the golden thread through the review. Thank you.
Fantastic. We are bang on 11:30, so very, very good on time from both of us. I have enough questions to probably go for another hour, but you've already given us an hour of your time. We're so, so grateful for that, Becky. So thank you so much. It's been such a super session, and I'm sure everyone listening has enjoyed it as much as I have. So thank you so much. Just before I go, if you've enjoyed today's webinar, please do check out Eduscape. So that's run by Schools Week's publishers, and it's the home of professional learning and collaboration across education and skills. You can find out more about it by visiting educationscape.com. So thank you to everyone again for attending. Thank you, Becky, and we hope everyone has lovely weekends when you get there. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for the opportunity, John, and to everybody for listening. Thanks again.